Welcome class 9. This is the part 3 of French Revolution chapter. In this video we'll be learning about how France abolished monarchy and became a republic. The Revolutionary Wars. As we saw in the last video that how Louis XVI gave recognition to the National Assembly and accepted constitutional monarchy, but the situation in France continued to be tense during the following years. Although Louis XVI had signed the constitution, he entered into secret negotiations with the King of Prussia. Rulers of other neighboring countries too were worried by the developments in France and made plans to send troops to put down the events that had been taking place there since the summer of 1789. Before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792 to declare war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers thronged from the provinces to join the army. They saw this as a war of the people against kings and aristocracies all over Europe. Among the patriotic songs they sang was the Marseillaise, composed by the poet Roger Delisle. It was sung for the first time by volunteers from Marseilles as they marched into Paris and so got its name. The Marseillaise is now the national anthem of France. The Jacobin Club. The Revolutionary Wars brought losses and economic difficulties to the people. While the men were away fighting at the front, women were left to cope with the tasks of earning a living and looking after their families. Large sections of the population were convinced that the revolution had to be carried further as the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer sections of society. Political clubs became an important rallying point for people who wished to discuss government policies and plan their own forms of action. And the most successful of these clubs was that of the Jacobins, which got its name from the former convent of Saint Jacob in Paris. Women too had been active throughout this period, formed their own clubs. It was led by Maximilien Robespierre. The Jacobins. The members of Jacobin Club were called as Jacobins, which mainly included small shopkeepers, artisans such as shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmakers, printers, as well as servants and daily wage workers. Their leader was Maximilien Robespierre. A large group among the Jacobins decided to start wearing long striped trousers similar to those worn by dock workers. This was to set themselves apart from the fashionable sections of society, especially nobles, who wore knee breeches. It was a way of proclaiming the end of the power wielded by the bearers of knee breeches. These Jacobins came to be known as the Sans-Culottes, literally meaning those without knee breeches. Sans-Culottes men wore in addition the red cap that symbolized liberty. Storming of Palace of Tuileries. In the summer of 1792, the Jacobins planned an insurrection of a large number of Parisians who were angered by the short supplies and high prices of food. On the morning of August 10, they stormed the Palace of Tuileries, massacred the king's guards, and held the king himself as hostage for several hours. Later, the assembly voted to imprison the royal family. Elections were held, and from now on, all men of 21 years and above, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. Establishment of Convention. The newly elected assembly was called the Convention. It gave voting rights to all men of 21 years and above, regardless of their wealth. On 21st September 1792, it abolished monarchy and declared France a republic. Execution of the royals. Louis XVI was sentenced to death by a court on the charge of treason. On 21st January 1793, he was executed publicly at the Place de la Concorde. The Queen Marie Antoinette met with the same fate on 16th October 1793, as it is said that she said the very famous line that if they don't have the bread, then let them eat the cake and ice cream. But this is just a myth. She actually never said that line, but still she had to pay for it. The Reign of Terror. The period from 1793 to 1794 is referred to as the Reign of Terror. And why it was called as the Reign of Terror? Because Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. All those whom he saw as being enemies of the Republic, ex-nobles and clergy, members of other political parties, even members of his own party, who he did not agree with his methods, were arrested, imprisoned, and then tried by a revolutionary tribunal. If the court found them guilty, they were guillotined. The guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. It was named after Dr. Guillotin, who invented it. You can easily see the picture and understand what a guillotine is. Robespierre's extreme control. Robespierre's government issued laws placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grain to the cities and sell it at prices fixed by the government. The use of more expensive white bread was forbidden, and all citizens were required to eat the pain d'egalite, that was also called as equality bread, a loaf which was made out of whole wheat. Equality was also sought to be practiced through forms of speech and address. Instead of the traditional monsieur and madame, all French men and women were henceforth citoyen and citoyenne. Churches were shut down and their buildings were converted into barracks or offices. Robespierre pursued his policy so relentlessly that even his own supporters began to demand moderation. Finally, he was convicted by a court in July 1794, and on the next day, that is on the 28th July 1794, he was sent to the guillotine. This particular action is often categorized or termed as the Thermidorian reaction. A directory rules France. The fall of the Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle class to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-propertied sections of society. It provided for two elected legislative councils. These then appointed a directory, an executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as a safeguard against the concentration of power in a one-man executive as under the Jacobins. However, the directors often clashed with the legislative councils, who then sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the Directory ultimately paved the way for the rise of a military dictator which we know as Napoleon Bonaparte. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals of freedom, of equality before law, and of fraternity remained inspiring ideals that motivated political movements in France and rest of Europe during the following century.